Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm Robin. I'm a filmmaker and photographer based on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And today I want to talk to you about my Lightroom workflow between the iPad and the Mac. Let's take a look. Last time I had an iPad was in 2011, the iPad 2, and that was a great product. But if you wanted to use your iPad for professional use, let's say for video or photo, for example, there wasn't that many apps. I believe you had iMovie and iPhoto, but those were very light versions and not particularly suited for a professional workflow. But in recent years, Apple really put some stronger chip in the iPad, especially with the new M1 and M2 chip. You can really have some powerful softwares. The thing is that for the longest time, the software was the missing key. And we see more and more professional softwares dedicated for the iPad and taking advantage of the touchscreen because it's a different way of using softwares. For example, Adobe has a version of Photoshop, Lightroom, and Illustrator for the iPad. Blackmagic also have their version of DaVinci Resolve that was like fully remade for the iPad, which is great for filmmakers. So now my iPad is fully integrated into my creative workflow, and it works perfectly alongside my Mac. And today I want to talk to you about two software in particular, Lightroom for iPad and Lightroom Classic. These two software works hand in hand, and you have the ability to share the photos between the iPad and the Mac through the Adobe Cloud. And they also share the same features, although Lightroom Classic still has some couple of features that are unavailable on Lightroom. But every couple of months they come with new updates and new features. So it's great to see that the Lightroom for iPad is becoming a more powerful and more professional software every month. The thing is, it can be quite difficult to understand how Lightroom works with Lightroom Classic, where those RAWs are going, because once you start uploading the RAWs to the iPad, you want to make sure that they're fully backed up and that you're not going to lose any images. So a lot of people found that it's difficult to actually make a consistent workflow between the iPad and the Mac. But you will need some specific things to set up this particular workflow. Let's start with the iPad. So this is an iPad M1 Pro. You can use any type of iPad. Most of the recent iPad will work with Lightroom. That being said, I would strongly suggest you get an iPad Pro, first of all, because they have the M1 and now the M2 chip. So those will last longer, and you can make sure that this investment will usually should work for the next couple of years. The second reason is that the iPad Pro comes with a Thunderbolt 4 ports. And that's going to be useful for later down the road on the workflow that I'll explain soon. Next, the computers. Well, technically you could bypass the computers and make all of the edits solely on the iPad. But the goal of this workflow is to have a workflow between the iPad and a Mac, for example. Next, you're going to need an Adobe subscription. So most of you may already have the standard plan with all of the Adobe app, and it comes standards with 20 gigabytes of cloud storage. But I recently switched to the photography plan. It includes Photoshop, Lightroom, and Lightroom Classic, and has 1 terabyte of cloud storage, which is great for that workflow. But that being said, if you do need all of the Adobe apps, you can always purchase additional cloud storage through your Adobe account. Next is the Apple Pencil, and this is optional, but I think it's still one of the best accessories to get with your iPad, especially when using Lightroom, because you can use masking more precisely, dodging and burning and that kind of thing. There are other brands that provide pencils for the iPad. I just stuck with the Apple one because of all the reviews I read. This was the most comfortable one. Next, you're going to need some sort of dongle to be able to connect an SD card or a compact flash or a CF Express or anything you want for that matter to the iPad. I use a Anchor, it's the Anchor. It's a 5-in-1 or something. The great thing, so this is a USB-C. It will work great with the Thunderbolt 4. It comes with 2 USB 3, it comes with a micro SD cards, HDMI, HDMI, Ethernet could be useful as well for a particular use with this iPad and that workflow. And then it comes with 2 USB-C ports. One is power delivery and one is for data. And we'll see later on why it's great to have those 2 separate ports so you can charge the iPad while using it for the workflow. Moving on, we have some sort of like storage. So I use an SSD SanDisk. And this is actually the core of my whole Lightroom workflow, and I'll explain that later. Same, you technically can bypass the external storage and solely use an iPad if you have bigger storage, but I always like to have a second storage for backup. And now that we have all of the items, I'll just show you a quick drawing I made on Freeform. This is basically to show you how the workflow works, hopefully in a simpler way. I'll open Freeform so you get an idea of how the workflow works. You see the iPad screen somewhere around. And it starts with the camera. This workflow will work with any type of camera, and you can either choose to bring the SD card directly into the hub or connect the camera to the hub or directly to the iPad if you wish. Now, there are two ways of doing this workflow. The easiest way is to simply, like I said, connect the SD card to Lightroom. You're going to open Lightroom and fetch the images from the SD card. So the SD card is here and it's going to import the images to Lightroom. Once Lightroom is done importing, it will let you know that you can remove the SD card. And if the iPad is connected to Wi-Fi or you're using the iPad with a 5G chip or LTE, and you have very strong data, you could technically upload images to the data, but in Canada it's not the case, so always wait to have a Wi-Fi. The iPad will be connected to Wi-Fi and it will automatically start uploading all of the images to the cloud. One note here is that you do need to leave Lightroom on the iPad. You cannot put it in the background. This Lightroom is in the background, it won't upload. And that's the reason why it might be useful to plug the iPad to power, because there's an option into Lightroom that if you have power, it will keep Lightroom on and it will do the upload. Once the upload is done, all of your raw images are now on the cloud. And that's why having a storage space of 1 terabyte is useful, because if you're using a camera with 45 megapixel, for example, you're going to eat up your 20 gigabytes. That's the simplest way, because now the images are on the cloud. They also have a copy on the iPad, or you could technically start organizing, culling through the images, and even doing some edits on the iPad. And all of that will be uploaded to the cloud. Then you could launch Lightroom Classic, and as soon as Lightroom Classic is open and set up correctly, it will start downloading the images from the cloud, and you can do edits on the Lightroom Classic. And now the full workflow here works back and forth, meaning that whether you do a change on Lightroom Classic or Lightroom on the iPad, the cloud will synchronize all of that, and all of those edits will be available on the different devices. Now, let's say that it's a bigger shoot and you want to make sure that you have a copy of your raw images not only on the iPad and on the cloud, but also on a physical storage such as a hard drive or SSD, where you can do that with the iPad as well. So I'm just going to change color here to give you an idea. So that was the red is number 1. Sorry for my awful handwriting like this. And this is going to be blue for the workflow number 2. Again, sorry for the handwriting. Okay, so in this case, we want to use Lightroom just first. You're going to open the app files on the iPad, and you need to have the SSD and the SD card connected at the same time. And from the app files, you will tell the iPad to copy the images from the SD card to the SSD. Once the import is done, you can finally launch Lightroom, and from Lightroom, you can fetch the images from the SSD. So Lightroom will get the images from the SSD. Again, if the iPad is connected to Wi-Fi, it will start uploading the images to the cloud. Once the import is done on Lightroom, you can disconnect the SSD. That's just your secondary backup. You don't need to worry about it anymore. And you can still use all of the images and organize them and edit them with the physical copy on the iPad that's backed up to the cloud, okay? So once all of it is through the cloud, again, it's going to be the same thing. And once you open Lightroom Classic, it's the same thing. Lightroom will fetch the images from the cloud, and same thing applies here. Any type of edits you're doing on Lightroom Classic or on Lightroom on iPad or on the iPhone will work, and all will be synced together. And if you want 2 physical copies, one on the SSD and one on another drive, you can do that. This is independent from Lightroom though, so you would simply connect your SSD and your backup drive to the hub on the iPad and simply back up the images onto a backup drive, for example. All right, so now that we move to Lightroom Classic. And this is where the workflow starts to be a bit complicated. The way Lightroom Classic is downloading and storing the images downloaded from the cloud. So I'll show you later how I set up my Lightroom Classic to work with this workflow. But once the images are on the Lightroom Classic, it's the same thing. You would have a secondary backup, and you would send the images onto a external backup. And as well, if you have a cloud storage space, such as a Blackbase, I believe it is, so it would be the same thing. So now suddenly all of your RAWs are backed up in various different ways, and you shouldn't have any issue by losing any type of RAW. So that's the workflow. I know it looks a bit complicated, but once you got the idea, it's actually quite simple. And I'll have a much cleaner version of this drawing available on the video, so you can just pause it and maybe take a screenshot. Okay, now I'm actually going to show you how the workflow works. I shot some images last night, and I'm going to import them on the iPad and show you the full workflow step by step, so you have a better idea of how the whole thing works. All right, we're back online. I'll just start by getting the SD card from my camera and add it to the actual hub, which is here. So for the sake of this example, I will actually start by uploading the images onto the backup hard drive. So that way you have the complete workflow. So the great thing about that hub, like I said, is that I can actually plug the hard drive at the same time as an SD card. Even if I need, I can also plug to power. Okay, the hub is connected, so you should see my iPad display at the moment. We'll go in the actual app file. So I'll go in there and I'll go into my raw and final 2023, and then I'll create a new folder here. This was shot in 2023 of May, and yesterday we were the 08. Okay, Victory in Europe. And then this was shot in Piper, so I'll just put the date, the dates and the location, and that's it. So this is how I organize my images. Usually I do have the year, months, and day, a little dashy thing, and then the location. That's my organizations, or sometimes I'll have the subject of the shoot. So I'll enter OK. And inside this folder, I create a new folder called Raw Backup. This is Raw Backup, all right. And the great thing is that on the iPad, you can actually have two windows side by side with a split view. So I'll just select all of the images here, okay, and I'm going to go to More and Copy, all right. And on the right here, I have the folders with my raw backup. So I'm gonna long press, and I can see the past. That's it. So now I just have to wait. I'll just speed through it. Okay, it took some time, but we now have all of the images from the SD cards backed up onto the folder on the SSD. So I can technically, I don't even think I can actually eject on this. Oh, that's curious. No, I can't. Okay, so you don't eject on the iPad, you just simply actually physically eject. All right, so I now remove the actual SD card, and so far we do have, I'm gonna put this one in full screen. So far we have, like I said, all of the images from the SD cards are backed up on the SSD. So now I'm going to open Lightroom. It's in my dock here, okay, and then you are welcome here with the interface, and at the bottom right you can actually see how to add images. So you can either choose from the camera roll, from files, and from camera device. If you were to directly import images from an SD card onto Lightroom, you would choose from camera device. In that case, we're going to choose from files because that's where we put the backup images. I'm going to choose from file, and then I'm going to go to, where is it? It's here. All right, into my raw and final 2023, slide all the way down, Piper's Lagoon, and then this. And then here, if you select one, you can actually here see select all. There we are. And now we're gonna choose open. All right. Now it's going to import the images, and then it says here, if you click on the little cloud icon, preparing imports. So we're just going to wait for that. Okay, and just like that, it already started to import the images. So all of the images are coming here. If you go on the little cloud icon, you can see the status of where Lightroom is doing. It's currently importing 157 images and uploading at the same time. So that's a great thing, is that it can actually do both at the same time. So we'll just speed up and wait for that to go. Depending on your Wi-Fi connection, it's gonna take longer and shorter, obviously. You can also use Lightroom while it's being backed up. So if you wish starting culling some images, organizing them, making new selections, or even some edits, you can while it's uploading. And Lightroom will do its own thing, and despite the fact it's keep uploading, it will upload it with the changes onto the cloud. All right, now that we're all synced and backed up, so you can see on the top right corner here, it says synced and backup, so we're ready to go. So at this point, there are 3 copies of the raw images. The first one is on the backup SSD. This is the first thing that we've done. Then it's on Lightroom. So Lightroom uses a bit of a different way of doing things. If you go to settings here and local storage, it will actually let you know how many local copies are stored on the iPad. So here it says locally stored copy 0, and there in the cached file it's about 9 gigabytes. So here it means that Lightroom went directly and uploaded them to the cloud. And if you go into the settings here, cloud storage and sync, so it says here right now it's using about 16% of my cloud storage, so it's nothing. I just started using that 1 terabyte. And then obviously it's here it says no cellular for sync because I just turned off the cellular data on my iPad. And here you can choose either to download smart previews. So those are like smaller versions of your raw files where you can do some edits. And Lightroom is actually applying the edits into the cloud. And this allows you to reduce the amount of space needed on the iPad to work on your images. And finally, this is the setting I was telling you about earlier, prevent from sleep. So if the iPad is connected to power, it can actually prevent the iPad to sleep. I connected the iPad to power right now just to give you an idea. All right, that's about it for the settings. So now we have all of those images on the iPad. There are 2 things you can do so far. You can actually create some albums and folders. So a folder, for example, I have a folder per year, and then I have an album for each of the projects. So again, the album will be named the same way I named the folder onto the backup drive. So for example, it's going to be 2023 0508 dash, I believe it's a dash. Maybe it's a dash, and the name of the project or the locations. So I'm going to create a new album here inside my 2023 folder. 2023 0508 VE day, and then this was Piper Lagoon. All right, so now that I have my album created, I'm going to go back up and I'm going to go to recently added. This was added on May 9th, so I'm going to, there are 243 images, and I can just select all of those from May 9th like this. And I can add to 2023 all the way down to Piper's, and I click add. So the great thing about albums is that it allows you to properly organize images on Lightroom on the iPad, and it will also download that album onto Lightroom Classic, which I'll show you to you later. So we'll go to our recent album here, and then that's where you can do most of the work. You can start like organizing images, making new selects, and also editing. For the sake of the argument here, I'm going to go click on the photo, and I'm going to click on here. I'm going to go here on the little star, which means this is the mode to select images. So you can either choose the star ratings or the flag settings. I usually use the star settings. So I'm going to say yes to this one, yes to this one, yes to this one, and like no to this one and no to this one, for example. Okay, so we have 5 images right now. And if I go here, I can actually see all of the images that has been flagged. And I only have the 3 first images. So for this video, I'm just going to edit these 3 images in black and white so you can see the changes on Lightroom Classic and in the cloud. So we're going to go to edit here, and I'm just going to change the profile very easily. Here, I'll do the same for this one, monochrome, right on, and then the final one here. And then here, we're going to go to profile and switch it to black and white. All right, so now we have those 3 images. Those are my selects. If I wish to see all of the images, I just have to untoggle this, and then I see all of the images I shot in this album. And by clicking on the little cloud icon here, you can see that the changes are made, they're synced and backed up. So now let's say that all of you've edited and organized all of your images on Lightroom, and it's time to jump onto Lightroom Classic. So the heart of my Lightroom workflow stands on this SSD. Obviously, this SSD has some backups, but I decided to swap the Lightroom Classic catalog, the raw files, the JPEG files, and everything basically on this SSD, because I sometimes use different computers. So by having all of my Lightroom files and the raw files on a single SSD, it's easier for me to swap between computers. Alright, and you should see the display of my MacBook in a moment. We're going to launch Lightroom Classic here. So I used to have a catalog per year into my Lightroom Classic, but I recently merged all of the catalog together. You have to keep in mind that if you wish to sync images from Lightroom to Lightroom Classic, the sync option only works with a single catalog. That being said, if you still wish to keep, let's say, a catalog per year, this workflow will still work because you simply just sync the current catalog for the year. But if you have a catalog per project, for example, then this workflow might not work, or you might need to choose a single catalog to sync your images. So now let's jump into the preference of Lightroom Classic here and go to the tab for Lightroom Sync. Okay, so that's where things can get a bit confusing, so just bear with me so I can explain it. Here you can choose where Lightroom Classic will store the raw downloaded from the cloud. So it can be either on the SSD, it can be on an external SSD, it is really up to you. In my case, I chose to add these images onto the same SSD. If you go here, and I'm gonna go to Raw and Finals, I have a root folder called Lightroom CC, and inside I have the subfolder that I set up, and those are per year, months, and days. So 2023, 0315, all the way down. So that way, each of my projects is organized per day. And that's something to keep in mind, is the way that Lightroom store and organize images is by date, okay? So if you have a different way of organizing images, that could be an issue for you. In my case, I've always organized my images that way, so it works well. Okay, so now if you can see all the way here, you have 2023, 05, 08. Those are the images that Lightroom Classic already made a subfolder and downloaded the images onto my external SSD, and those photos are referenced into Lightroom Classic, okay? And here this is where you choose what type of subfolder you want, okay? So you have a different variations of how you want those subfolders to be named. And I use the simple one, which is the year, again, the months, and the day. And you can choose if you want to have like a space in between. It's really up to you, but that one matches my current organizing system, so I'm gonna leave it as is. So if you just set up the Lightroom Sync for the first time, you're gonna see a new category below catalog here, and it's called All Sync Photograph. And here I have 4,004 images synced to the cloud. And so all of those images here are like synced, like I said, to the cloud, and they also have a physical copy on my SSD, okay? So here I have the folder structure I'm currently using. And like I said earlier, all of the images that Lightroom downloaded from the cloud are stored into a folder called Lightroom CC for cloud. And then it creates subfolders per the day, okay? So if we go all the way down here, we have 2003, 05, 08, and here all the images. And you can already see that Lightroom Classic knows that I've made some changes to those images, and those three first images are in black and white, and the two images after that are rejected. So that's the great thing about it, is that all of those changes you're doing on the iPad are almost instantly made on Lightroom Classic. This is very powerful. And now that I have my images on Lightroom Classic and Lightroom, I can decide to edit some images on Lightroom Classic. And if I choose this first image, for instance, and I'm gonna go into the develop module and take a little bit of time. Oh yeah, those new features I haven't taken a look yet, so we're gonna remove those. Now let's say that this image I don't really want it in black and white anymore. So I'm gonna switch it back to add up color, and now it's back in colors. And if you see on the top right here, you do have the icon that tells you that it's currently syncing images, okay? So we'll let him do that and syncing a bit more images right now. So as you can see, I changed my mind. Looking at the images on the Lightroom Classic, I decided to put it back into color. So I'm in develop module right now, the photo is back to colors. I'm gonna press G to go back to the library mode, and I'm gonna check out my cloud icon. And here it says that it's all fully synced. So now let's say that you want to further continue editing on your iPad, whether on the comfort of your couch or on the go, or whatever you wish. So we're gonna go back onto the iPad, launch Lightroom, you should see on the screen at the moment. And then you can see already here, there was these three little dots in the cloud, and you can see the first images I just changed on Lightroom Classic is already back into color on Lightroom on the iPad. So that's very powerful, and you can just decide whether or not you want to do some edits on Lightroom and finish them on the iPad. So that's the basic workflow. So it can be a bit difficult, but if you know how Lightroom Classic works with photos, you should be able to run it pretty quickly. Another thing to note is that you remember we made an album into Lightroom on the iPad. Well, you can actually see those albums all the way down. Like I said, if you just launch the Lightroom sync, you should see a new collection set called From Lightroom, and that means it's all of the images that are from the cloud. And below you'll have all of those albums that you created on Lightroom for iPad. And on the left here you may see a small icon with 2 arrows pointing the other way. That means that this specific album is synced to the cloud. So any type of images you'll include to this album will be synced to the cloud, okay? So we're gonna go all the way down, and here I have the same album I've made on Lightroom, and it's the same. And that's another thing that can get a little bit tricky, is that Lightroom use folder and albums, whereas Lightroom Classic use collections inside collection sets, okay? So if on Lightroom Classic you've already made the same collection named, like I named mine, for example, 2003 or 508-Piper Lagoons, Lightroom won't know to put these images downloaded inside the collection. So that's another thing that's a bit confusing, is albums against collections. Despite the fact that Lightroom Classic still shows it as a collection, it is in fact an album, okay? So another thing to note, and I know there is plenty of things to note, is that this workflow is a one-way street in a way. So Lightroom works as a cloud base, whereas Lightroom Classic works with folder and all of that thing. So you can only import actual raw files into Lightroom. It will then put them onto the cloud, and then you can download them on Lightroom Classic. However, if you have some images and some raw images on Lightroom Classic and you wish to sync them to the cloud, it won't sync the actual raw, okay? It will sync a smart preview. Okay, and now we move into the more advanced workflow, okay? So as you saw, Lightroom Classic has a very specific way of organizing images it downloaded from the cloud. We had to create a folder, and then below you could choose subfolders, but the naming of the subfolder had a preset, right? You couldn't put exactly what you wanted. So now all of those images are on a different location on either your SSD or an external drive. And maybe you wish to include all of these images into your normal way of organizing images, or maybe onto a different drive because the internal SSD is getting full and you wish to archive those images. Well, the great thing is that you can actually move the physical copies of those raw images and keep them synced to the cloud. So now I'm going to show you how I organize my images. You don't need to take all of those steps, but this will going to give you an idea of what you can do while keeping those raw synced to the cloud, okay? So now I'm back inside that folder. So this is a physical folder where the images downloaded from the clouds are stored, okay? So I'm going to select all of them. So now I like to rename my raw images. Some people might not, but for me it's easier to find them later on. So I'm going to go to Photo, and then Library, and all the way down to Rename Photo, okay? So now I do have a preset for that, and that's my name. It has the date, the camera, and then the original name attached, okay? So despite the fact that I'm going to rename the raw file, Lightroom is still able to sync them with the cloud, which is pretty cool. So I click OK, it's going to rename 243 images. Okay, and then I'm going to put them in 6 because I haven't worked on those yet. So now all of my images, I've renamed them. And you can see on the top icon here that it's actually syncing images. So that's the one thing that people might not like renaming their photo, is that Lightroom Classic actually needs to resync the images and tell the cloud that those images that I just renamed are indeed the same ones. So it will change the name store also on the iPad. So now I wish to archive this project, and I need to move all those images into a different locations on the drive, or it could be on a different drive, okay? And I'm going to move those images onto the different locations. I could normally do it in Lightroom, but since I've already created a folder, it won't work, and it will tell me there is already a folder with the same name. Okay, so I'm gonna go to 2003. Here I have my current folder that I created earlier at the beginning of this process with the raw backup. So I'm gonna create a new tab here, and I'm gonna go to get these images here, Lightroom, all the way down, And I'm gonna click all of those images. I'm gonna copy them into here, a new folder. I'm going to call raw DNG. The reason why I called this folder raw and DNG is because I used to convert all of my CR3 raw into DNG, but I stopped doing it. So now I have two folders. I have the raw DNG, which has my working copy, and I still have that raw backup that we created initially, okay? So I'm going to pass all those images inside the raw DNG. It's going to copy images, and it's already done, which is really fast, okay? Now I'm going to go back into Lightroom, and now I'm going to right click on the folder, and I'm going to tell him to update the folder locations. And I'm going to go choose here, images, final, Piper's Lagoon, and raw DNG, and choose. Now Lightroom Classic is referencing those working files from that new location, right? So if I actually go here on the left, this is my SSD, this is my folder structure. The images used to be inside the Lightroom CC, but I moved them because I wished to archive this project, right? So I'm going to go to 2023 below here, all the way down, and now I have this new folder called 2023 or 508 Piper's Lagoon. And if I right click on the little arrow here, I can see the subfolder I created with the raw DNG, okay? And if you see, the images, on top of each images here, you can see there's still the same arrow, okay, pointing in the opposite directions. That means that despite the fact that I move the physical locations of the image on Lightroom Classic, it still knows that those images are synced, and I can still access and edit these images on iPad, okay? Despite the fact that I rename each raw file, I've changed the physical locations on Lightroom Classic, the cloud is still able to sync those images, keep them in the cloud, and I can still access them and edit them on the iPad. And that's pretty powerful. So you may have noticed in my doc that we had like Lightroom Classic, RRC. That's the app we've been using so far. But there is also an app called Adobe Lightroom. This is in fact the exact same app on the iPad. And if you wish to solely use Adobe Lightroom and have a copy on the iPad sync to your MacBook, and you wish to step away from Lightroom Classic, you can do that. And the reason why I have Adobe Lightroom CC on my computer is that I can actually import presets from Lightroom Classic. So all my presets and my profiles, I can import them into Lightroom. And this will in fact sync them through the cloud, and I'll be able to have the same presets I use on Lightroom Classic onto Adobe Lightroom on the iPad. So if you wish to have your Lightroom Classic presets on Adobe Lightroom, I'll just show you that right now. So we're just going to open Adobe Lightroom on the Mac. It's going to launch, okay, right on. And then on the top right here, you can see the interface is a bit different than Lightroom Classic. But if you go into the edit mode here, which is like the little slider things, there is a small button called presets, okay? So we're going to click on it, and we're going to choose import presets. Now you have to find the location in which Lightroom Classic store those presets. It should be a generic location for all of us. And it's actually in fact inside the library. I put the library into my favorite here. So you may not have this library inside your favorite, but no worries. You're just going to go, and then you're gonna press the Option key on your laptop, and by doing so, you can see that it reveals the library folder. So you can go here, and then here below Application Support, you're gonna go to Adobe, Camera Raw, and Camera Raw under Setting. You have all of those presets, okay? So now you can actually keep this library inside your favorite on the left here, and go back to Lightroom on the Mac. Import presets, we're gonna choose library, we're gonna choose application support, Adobe, Camera Raw, and then settings. And then you can just choose each folder in import, and they'll come here, and you'll be able to have them on the iPad. All right, guys, so that's the workflow. I know it's a big workflow. It can be difficult to understand, but hopefully that video was clear enough so you can get an idea of how the workflow works between Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. And if you have additional questions, you can just drop them in the comments below, and I'll make sure to answer you. Thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of this long video. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing so I can do more of those videos in the future. See you next time.